Welcome once again to The Lost Signals discusses games and gaming culture, a pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast where we focus on various aspects of video games as well as other issues and topics within gaming in general. Hello there, welcome back to The Lost Signals discusses games and gaming culture, and if you're having difficulty listening to this podcast, we will adjust to that difficulty for you tonight, and I am Scott Thurlow, here with Stephen Amosi.
How you doing?
And Dr. Professor Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Hey, my ex-wife was dynamically difficult.
Hey now, hey, take it easy. Nice play. But yes, dynamic difficulty is indeed the topic we'll be discussing. And since it was sort of Ian's spurred idea, I will right now defer to him to maybe define it and flesh out what do we mean by dynamic difficulty?
Well, first I want to say, give a shout out to Game Theory. Matt Pat, yeah, who I was watching some of his older work, and he had a discussion on dynamic difficulty, and that's what spurred my interest in this topic. But the idea is that in game design, especially with the broadening of demographics, you have new players and people who've been playing their entire lives going into a game, and how do you craft a difficulty level that can appeal to the broadest spectrum possible without also turning off players, unless you're going for that kind of style. But it's the theory into game design, game theory, things like that, about how to organically craft a difficulty system while the game is running.
Right.
So that's basically the definition of it. I can go into more detail if you're interested, but
no, that's a general idea, right? So so sort of like running behind the scenes, right? Like without the player's knowledge, and not even like them knowing that's even like a thing per se. So I'm just gonna add on, not add on, but you've heard of level scaling. It's not the same thing exactly at all, but it's maybe a similar concept that some of you out there might be more familiar with, right? So it's that sort of applied large but covertly versus overtly, I guess is what I want to say about it. So yeah, that's a general idea. The core programming, the code of the game will take into account player behavior and or various other factors, right? And then adjust, either maybe tune up or tune down, depending on the context and the algorithms that are running and what's happening at the moment to moment, as you mentioned, E, and then adjust the player's experience based on that.
Yeah. I was just going to add, I think this is a really fascinating topic because of the way that you get to see, you kind of get a backstage pass a little bit of what if you're privy to this, what the developers think of their players. And
to a degree.
I was reading an article about this, and they were talking about Crash Bandicoot and how they introduced dynamic difficulty in the second game because some players found certain levels to be really frustrating in the first game. And I think it's a really smart thing to implement in a game when you want to create a level of
accessibility,
enjoyment and accessibility. Yeah, so you want your players to continue to engage with the game, even if they're finding something a little bit difficult. You make it a little bit easier without letting them know. That's a really smart way to gamify the situation that's going on, or make it more engageable.
Gamify your games.
Yeah, exactly.
Now go quickly, maybe we'll turn ups, but in theory, optimally, when done in the best way, the player won't even know that there's a damn difficulty even occurring because it will be so well adjusted that it will give them, the sweet spot, challenging experience without being too hard, too frustrating, or too easy and too boring, right? Which is there's a famous chart about it, but even maybe Matt Pat even addressed that.
Yes.
But yeah, because that's the core theory, right? That's how you want it to be working when you're doing it. So
yeah, it's almost, you want your players to feel like they're getting better even if they're not.
Making progress.
Right.
Well, motive is one part on it, but I want to talk more about like the mechanics of it a little bit.
Sure, definitely.
So back in the day, you would do play testing, and you would craft the experience to match the audience you thought you were having.
Your focus
whether that
demographic.
To go into motive a little bit, whether you want to either building arcade game systems where you want it to then they keep putting in quarters, but you want to tune it so they feel they're making progress and have something to lose if they don't put in another quarter. But you would also have like you're building, but the problem is that kind of universal aspect makes it so that games are inherently imbalanced, that one gamer's experience will not be another gamer's experience. So dynamic difficulty allows it to tailor to the individual as opposed to universal.
Very good point.
But there is a fascinating aspect of where do you target this? I don't know how versed any of you are in the states in games.
A little bit.
But there's a reactive dynamic difficulty and a proactive dynamic difficulty. And one is, are you going to adjust mid combat or mid do you extend the pixel a little bit so that your character can land the hitbox a little bit, or do you keep it or do you do proactive, such as you're witnessing the progress of the gamer at this point, and how do we tailor the next state they're transitioning to, difficulty based on their current state. But there's a problem with that proactive approach, is that it's inherently it leads to flaws, because when that state is adjusted may not accurately make the prediction for the movement into the next state. So you could have a feedback loop of a character dying, a small adjustment, but they're still going to die, small adjustments, they're still going to die, and it's not affecting it. But the reactive, on the other hand, can feel more like a deus ex machina, where you feel the hand of the developer or the AI here adjusting on the fly. So there's trade-offs to both of these, but it's a very interesting discussion. I know that zombie game, Left 4 Dead, is famous for its kind of proactive adjustments as you went along. But that's that to me was a fascinating discussion, and looking into a lot of it's actually based on inventory theory, on the game assessing what the character has in their inventory, like ammo wise or health points wise, and adjusting the game so they always feel that they're either they get less in the next stage, or the difficulty's amped up a little bit to make it so there's always that pressure upon the player.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of modern day, from what I've read, a lot of modern day theory on dynamic difficulty comes from that inventory management systems.
Sure, certainly. So I want to go back to maybe touch upon one of the major questions you said, how to do it well, so it covers the most area that you can for the most broad gaming experience of people playing your game. But since Steve-O's got the Crash Bandicoot background, and you mentioned a few things, I just wanted to throw out a couple other games that either. So they definitely have it, the devs admitted, we definitely put dynamic difficulty into these games, or it's very heavily, the fan base is it's got to be there, even though they never said it. So Crash is definitely one, Steve-O. And do you remember what? Can you answer for me how they did it? What is a dynamic difficulty mechanics in Crash? How did they implement it to help out a player who was struggling or was doing good?
So I don't.
I know it's a trick, not a trick question, but surprise.
I can't necessarily answer that exactly, but I believe that a lot of it had to do with, if I remember correctly, a lot of it had to do with expanding hitboxes slightly, and just allowing you to. Ian, do you know more about?
I know one of them.
Before you jumped in, I think it's right in the picture there.
Right.
It's the extra damage masks. It would space it out more if it's so you getting more damage, or no, they appear more often. You
would get more of them, right? And there's another big one is that they would give you more checkpoints. So if you're dying a lot, they would set you back. The checkpoint would be more forgiving as well. So it's both those are the two main ones that I remember. And so you mentioned Left 4 Dead, and actually that's interesting one. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but when Left 4 Dead came out, like the director AI, which is what they called it, was like sort of like pretty innovative at the time.
There's a selling point that they're
like, oh,
we do dynamic difficulty. We customize the game for you.
Yeah, so if you're good, etc. So sorry, Steve. Oh yeah, I think you were going to say something.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say one other thing that I got reminded of about Crash Bandicoot was they slowed down like any chase levels. They slowed down the things that were chasing you.
Yeah, like the boulder would be a little bit slower
if you weren't doing well in them. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, sorry.
No, but you're right. Like, so it was a mix of them. So Crash was like a pretty good one, an earlier-ish one that actually did a number of things. And instead of doing 1 or 2, did like 4 or 5 that we just mentioned, even. Right. So Left 4 Dead. So here's another good one. This is my favorite one, and you might like the one after this. So Bioshock, and I found this out like later on. Whenever you're in an enemy encounter, the first shot that an enemy fires at you will always miss you. So it's sort of like a warning shot, like literally a warning shot. So you know that's there. You don't get fucking blindsided, and like that's pretty cool. And I did not know that till like as I delved in, became more and more of a fan of it.
It's an audio cue that like a boss music coming on. So like that to me is not a cheap method. It's just kind of signal. Yeah,
it makes sense, but like
that's not even dynamic. It's like that always happens, right? Like it doesn't change.
You're right. That's true, but I'm saying like it's behind. Like it's not like the game tells you that ever,
right?
And like it's just there. It just happens. But like they accounted for it. And did you know, Steve-O, that Half-Life 2 also has something somewhat similar, where like it's not quite to the degree of that, but some of the enemies will have more of a chance of missing you. Like the head crabs will like have a decent chance of like not getting onto you, like, or the poison ones, whatever. Like, so it's like sprinkled in through Half-Life 2, which I didn't even know that either, but it is there. Like they admitted, like, yeah, we adjusted it. We tried to like have it so it's like somewhat on the fly to a degree, or at least these certain enemies will, for the most part, have a larger chance of doing this action, or like an action that gives you a chance as a player to react to it.
Right.
So yeah, a couple other things, but like those are the big ones. Like those are the ones that I found most interesting.
Well,
so
I know in Half-Life 2, also there's like the game makes alterations to like the amount of health drops and ammo drops that happen depending on how well you're doing. And like in that type of game, especially, like I remember that game pretty well because it was amazing. But like
sure.
I remember getting out of like fights and like getting to the next safe place or whatever, being like super low on health a lot. And like that's where dynamic difficulty really comes into play, is when it can adjust. It's when the game can adjust so that you just barely make it out of a fight alive. And like you remember that type of thing, like you remember just barely making it, like how epic that was, like how awesome you were. It's not because of
it's not you.
Right. It's the game like made you feel that way, but like it makes you feel like you want to keep playing, right? Yeah.
No, that's a good one, because the last one I have for you, this is an unofficial one. The devs, Resident Evil 4 is a legendary game, and it's never, ever been confirmed that it's there, but people play that game so much and to such a degree that it's the general consensus, like, it's happening in the same way of that, where, like, oh, if you're doing really well and you're really stocked up, then enemies will drop less health and ammo, like, you'll find less resources. Whereas if you're struggling, like you seem to be barely scraping by, then you'll find more of it in the boxes and enemies will drop more of it, etc. Although it's never been officially confirmed, but it just seems to be the case.
Like Resident Evil 4 has been out for so long, I can't believe nobody's done like a scientific study of that game to prove that that's the case.
I mean,
right?
they did. In the film theory, he actually showed, he's doing a stream. He went into a room and there were, I believe, 6 enemies and 2 on balconies. And he died, and he was streaming it. He was filming it. He went back to the room, and there were 4 enemies. The 2 on the balcony disappeared. So, Resident Evil 4 did.
It's pretty much all, I'm just saying the devs never said it, but like, yeah, it seems like it's been delved into, and that is the case. So let's, like I said, let's go back to something that we mentioned earlier on the onset. So it's a broad question. Do you guys think that broad question with 2 parts. Should more games, like, should it be more of a standard practice to implement dynamic difficulty? And then is that related to the fact that means you have to spend more time and resources and more QR doing that? Or do you think it should be like more of a niche, like not every game needs it, only some games would, depending on the nature of the game?
Well, I think the bottom line is we don't actually know how much dynamic difficulty is implemented. I would guess to some minor degree it's implemented in almost every game we play.
That's a good point.
Right?
True.
Like, the thing is, like, if you do it right, it's hard to tell that it's there at all.
Right, like that's again, like I started saying about. That's why I said at the outset, like when done perfectly, you won't not even supposed to know, right? Sure,
exactly. And like the thing is, you know, I'm sure like most of these games that we're talking about are fairly old at this point, or very old, if we're talking about Crash Bandicoot 2. Like, I'm sure it is much more subtle in the way. I'm sure developers who are doing this right are much more subtle in the way that they're implementing it these days, and like probably a lot of people don't actually want to talk about it too much. Like, you don't want to like give away the magic trick, right?
Because it feels
like,
cheap. Yeah,
you're a magician.
So I love magic, by the way. Anyway, I was playing when I watched this video for the first time. I was playing Final Fantasy VII in the remake. And it was that long driving sequence at the end of the game where you're fighting all the enemies on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And I ended up dying. I think it's like a 16, 20-minute like battle.
Long fucking
if you die. And I died at the final boss there. It's playing through again, and I'm like, I wonder if they adjusted the difficulty for me.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to, because I didn't want to play another 20 minutes to die again. Because here's the thing: is there is a thing about losing your audience if you're too difficult, unless you're specifically. And I wouldn't be surprised if like Dark Souls implemented it to a certain extent as well, even though they say they
a marginal
don't.
version of it.
Yeah, but the thing is, you want to keep your audience, and you want people to feel challenged, but nor do you want it to be oppressive to the point of
frustration and annoyance. Yeah, sure.
I honestly would be surprised if Dark Souls implemented it in, at least in their fight mechanics. So maybe in other parts of the game, maybe
inventory management, maybe.
But yeah, like something like that. But like the thing with Dark Souls is they are marketing specifically to a very niche
saying like
you know, gamer type, and the point of those games is that they're hard, right? Like, so that like they don't want to make it easier for anybody, I don't think, because when you overcome whatever you're trying to do, it's
it's
more of an accomplishment. Like you're more trying to like beat the difficulty level than you are the specific boss or anything.
But here's an interesting point then on that is it's From Software that does that, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They must, and from what I've played of them, they do QA to make sure that it is beatable. Right. So they do adjust the difficulty initially to their set of standards. So it's interesting to say that like they shouldn't do dynamic difficulty, but only do initial adjustment to a base standard that they have initially. And I understand the difference between it, but it's just kind of it almost seems like a nitpick on a certain extent.
On the surface, it does, but it really isn't, because I'm sorry, Steve-O, and I actually want you to answer this as well. But you guys are more versed in programming and coding and stuff than me. Like, of course, it's going to take time and effort and money to do a dynamic versus like, okay, our difficult run with From Software for a second, like as a example, right? We're going to make this game X difficulty, and that's it. Like, do it or don't, but we're not going to have dynamic difficulty. But if they were to, that means, of course, they have to spend more time QAing it, right? And have to, like, you know, make it run the AI, the algorithm in the background, adjusting it either on the fly or whatever manner they're going to have it, right? Versus just having straight up, like, here it is. Yeah, it's QA tested. Yeah, it's beatable, right? Like, you can do it if you're good enough. But there's no, like, we're not going to, like, give you, like, some behind-the-scenes helping hand, so...
But I think the thing with them is that they spend so much time and energy and you know, let's be honest, like, man-hour money on making these bosses beatable with the right if you find the right strategy, that's what they want you to figure out. It's not like they don't want to change the boss to adjust to you
or whatever.
They want you to realize what the boss is and adjust your playing style to fight that boss. And like, I mean, I'm not going to say that they definitely don't have any dynamic difficulty in those games, but I would be really surprised if they did.
Sure. So again, let's that's a very specific example, and which we use to frame this. But I believe actually I got one more for you. Metal Gear 5, Phantom Pain. Also, the enemy AI in the open maps would adjust to your play style. So let's say you're being super stealthy, right? It would somewhat adjust to that play style. But let's say you're being super aggressive, you just roll and blowing everybody away. The AI there would be more enemies, more soldiers with more higher level guns and shit, right? So depending on your place, you and I, all of us could play that game differently and then experience a somewhat different dynamic difficulty via the AI enemies behind the scenes because of the way that they had it. They specifically did include something like that.
Well, if we're talking about AI in general, oh, sorry, go on, Steven.
Well, I was going to say that just specific to that, to Metal Gear Solid 5, I kind of love that. They use dynamic difficulty to make it more difficult for you, depending on how you play, as opposed to most games that are make it easier for you if you're struggling.
Well, it depends, right? It could be either way.
Yeah, I think actually most dynamic difficulties attempt to match the play style.
Yeah,
it's just that people gravitate towards making it easier, but it could ramp up the difficulty as well.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to say is most games make it more difficult if you're playing well, or make it easier if you're not playing well. But Metal Gear Solid
straight up, no matter what,
apparently makes it more adapts their enemies to fight your style better, no matter what you're doing. So if you're coming on head on and fighting everybody head on, they fight one way, but if you're all stealth, they fight a different way, which is really fucking cool.
It's super Kojima, because think of it let's say given whoever you are, let's say I'm more of a stealth player, and in theory we'll say Ian's more of an aggressive player. So as we go through this specific game, maybe we might, as we notice that, or damn, maybe if we exchange play styles, that would then change the dynamic difficulty, right? Behind the scenes and stuff.
Be interesting to see how that went, if that happened.
Yeah.
Well, it's Halloween, so I want to bring up this one. Well, it's not really dynamic difficulty. It's just a cool AI. Is how they did Alien and Alien Isolation.
Yep. I was waiting.
Where they had
thank you for that. Yes.
Two separate AI systems. One for the sense of the alien itself, and one for kind of a broad overview director, if you will. That so it was combined both AIs to make a realistic hunting.
Yes, thank you so much. I was waiting for that. It was the one I was going to say for last, but yeah, I think Alien Isolation might be one of the best, if not the best, horror games of the decade, of this generation. And as you said, as I understand, so there's two AI brains at work, right? One which knows exactly where the player is at all times and what they're doing, and the other one is sort of randomly shuffles it, right? So it has some information from the all-knowing part of it, and then adjusts it on the fly to your action, to what you're doing. And yeah, it works really fucking well. I have to tell you, it's pretty great.
So if I may introduce a section of this, I want to go back to motive for a second, because this is a fascinating aspect of dynamic difficulty you don't think of. It's a very cynical application of it. So it's famous for Fortnite and PUBG and those type of games. I forget which one it was, but there's a controversy where they were actually making it easier for first-time players, and then slowly let you play normally. Because the idea is that people who win a match in their first time playing are more, or at least do well in it, are more likely to continue playing the game. If they just get killed, they're not likely to come back. So it's for their own benefit to allow.
It's cynically being you're good at this game. You're doing pretty good there.
Yeah,
no, you're right. I definitely know about that one. Yeah, it is cynical as hell.
And I wonder if online gambling games do a similar thing. It might be completely illegal and unethical. That doesn't mean they don't do it. give you a win early on to motivate you to continue gambling.
I mean,
I could see them completely doing that, even though I doubt that would be completely illegal.
I mean, it depends, like, right? Like, so maybe
I don't even know if it's illegal. Probably it sounds illegal.
Maybe this is like just a hardcore, like,
I don't know,
beyond video game discussions, like hardcore, like, AI theory, really. So like maybe we'll have to not delve in it too much. But to your point, and to say something about it, that there's no, like, you're right. There's no legalization around the algorithm. So like the algorithm, like, it could be within perfectly acceptable range. Like, almost always the algorithm senses, new user, new entry, gives you a win or two, and then as you play more, then starts winding back those wins and like making it more difficult. Of course, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put it past any fucking company whatsoever, especially video game ones, in tangentially related, like parallel related gambling sites and stuff. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, keep users, that's a smart way to go.
Yeah. So, like, in theory, like, to bring it back to games itself, just video games, you would ostensibly think that you want your players to finish the game. And therefore, in order to allow them to do that, if there's a difficult section or two or here or there, then it will, the dynamic difficulty, when properly tuned and working correctly, right, will, like we said, almost not be noticeable at all. And then therefore allow you to continue even if you're struggling. And then you will see the end of the game and you'll have a bigger player completion of your game, and they can, experience the whole gambit from A to B. But certainly, I guess if we're running a gambling site, then it's like a loot box thing kind of too, in a sense.
See, the only thing is, since I learned about this, I can't not view everything through when I play a game. Like, did they just switch up the difficulty on me? Did they add this enemy here because I was too long between a battle? It's now I'm getting paranoid.
It might drive you nuts, but like, I don't know, like, maybe not. Like, you're right. It is sort of like, you might give yourself some OCD thinking about it. Like, if you're like us and you play enough games, you're like, was that really me, or was it the right difficulty, right, or whatever? Like, sure. But I guess I'll say this to sort of like tone that back a bit. It's kind of moot in the end, as long as you're having a good time with the game, as long as you're like feel like you're being challenged but not overwhelmed, and not also being bored with just having, like, just OPing everything, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, if it's done really well, I mean, gambling sites aside, because that's a matter of
different conversation.
Tapping to people's addictions to steal all their money. But
video games are addiction as well. So
sure.
But in theory, you pay once, and right, we don't want to rabbit ourselves with microtransactions and all that, because it's a it's a Barthian web of corporate insidiousness.
Oh, sorry. You just thought me maybe think of something. It's fascinating. A lot of this is developed, because I said the inventory system. A lot of it was because massive multiplayer online games had to start keeping a track of rare objects and meeting them out, not to saturate markets. So it actually has to put a lot of economic theory into like things like World of Warcraft and stuff like that, and have behind the scenes adjustments. That's where a lot of dynamic difficulty comes from, which is fascinating to me as well.
No, that's a really good point. Like, I'm glad you brought that up too, because it sort of ties everything together. Good, too.
I was gonna say, it is really interesting how much economic theory goes into those types of games, and that has a lot to do with dynamic difficulty. In terms of like how they're meting out resources to players in those games, but yeah, in general, overall, I think it's something, it's a tool in a developer's toolbox. It can make for a better experience, and it can certainly make for a worse experience if
when used well.
Right. But I think, it seems like it's something that's been happening for a long time, probably longer than most people know. And it is, it's just part of making a gaming experience at this point, or part of some gaming experiences, if not most.
Perhaps more than you think, as you just said.
And, it is a really fascinating topic to me, because it's, it's like really low level AI, basically. It's a game learning the player and adjusting itself to that player. and that's kind of cool.
Various situations, depending on to some degree. But yeah, I guess I suppose we're winding down. But I do find it fascinating. And again, like I always defer to you guys. Ian first, sorry, Steve, and then you, I suppose. Don't get me wrong. I'm the least versed in like again the hard coding, like the actual programming, like what goes into having to account if you're going to have this stuff. Like if you're going to have to write like its own subsystems to handle it within any given game, right? But I mean, of course, as just a gamer myself, as you said, like I find it interesting to think about, like, oh, maybe it's there behind the scenes, and maybe I can spot it. Maybe I can see like how it's adjusting, on the fly.
Until you see it everywhere, including your own life.
Sure. I guess
I found a quarter on the ground. Is this an adjustment for how poor I am?
I suppose, when that happens, I'm like, oh, God, sweet. Reality has a dynamically programmed into it itself, I guess. Nice, I suppose. Sure. But no, and certainly, like, yeah, like, you want to delve more hardcore into it. But I guess at the end of the day, like, if you have never heard of this idea / topic, like, maybe now you've learned something and can look for it and think it's cool, because I do. And yeah, like, I'm now intrigued to see, like, whether or not I can spot it in whatever game I want to play, like the games I want to play upcoming, and maybe even like whether devs just outright say, like, yeah, we're going to include it, and here's how it might work, or at least like give you some vague outlines of how they're going to like implement it in the game they're going to make for you.
So two things I just wanted to is that one, it's fascinating to me how many people are trying to create third-party dynamic difficulties and sell their systems to gaming companies, because I think that in a sense you can broadly do genres with it, create a dynamic difficulty for first-person shooters, and we'll just adapt our. I think that actually has a future, and a lot of the papers I read about it were people attempting to create their own systems to eventually sell,
to ship out,
but
contract out.
I also in my class, I'm having my students do a literature review research paper, and a number of them said, I want to do AI video games. I'm like, yes, but what about? So I'm like, here's an example, wink wink, dynamic difficulty in games, wink wink. So I'm hoping a couple of them pick up on that and do my research for me.
There you go.
And that's what it's all about as a real developer. Certainly. So yeah, like I said, like I do find this fascinating. It's a very good suggestion for a topic, and I hope I had fun with the discussion. I hope you out there also again learn something. Maybe do some research, like he said. Like if this hits your buttons, like check it out. Check out more of it, because I think it's really cool, and you can see like how it might be maybe even used in the future, and how like especially since we're on the cusp of new gen stuff, and VR is still like getting bigger and bigger as it goes on. So yeah, but I think it's pretty fucking cool, guys.
But also, I'm a big thing of the gamification of life.
Yeah,
we talked about economics a bit, and game theory and economics are hand in hand.
It ties
so
into
you can implement kind of dynamic difficulties into many different aspects of life. I think it's not to say it's unexplored, but it's kind of one of the up and coming application of artificial intelligence.
No, you're right. It's not just for games, and it could be applied to other areas of study that, while they might not seem linked on the surface, they could be, and you could use this again idea / technology to perhaps do interesting things, or at least interesting analysis with them. And
I mean, just off the top of my head, like education, you can put in theory of dynamic difficulty for adjusting
tests
to the tests and things like that. And not just that, but like it's the idea of scale of an active scaling of difficulty, because part of teaching is about keeping my students who are very interested, I'm not talking about intelligence there, but very engaged, and keeping my students who aren't engaged, and how do I optimize that? And I think that AI in this is for maximal good if used for good, and that's what our goal in life should be.
Yeah, I was just saying, teachers have been using dynamic difficulty for hundreds of years.
True. Yep. You're right on. No doubt. Good point.
But yeah, it is. I want to say I'm interested to see where this goes, but like I feel like the further on we get with the technology, the more invisible it's going to become, and the less you're going to know about it. And
that, again, essentially, in theory, is the whole goal of this, this certain, this specific angle. So yeah, man,
The illusion of meritocracy.
So we might be talking about it on the cusp of it like disappearing from academia, because no one's gonna really know shit about it other than the people that develop the games.
We'll remember. You heard it here first.
Oh no. Academics love hearing themselves speak, so there's going to be plenty of TED Talks and papers written about this.
True.
You never interfere falling into
I'll do it. I'll get on. Yeah. I love hearing myself talk, and I can talk about this shit too. But yeah, so I mean, I think that will do it, at least for now, for tonight, for this discussion of it. And yeah, seriously, maybe we'll revisit it and like do some more hardcore stuff or write an article or whatever. But like I said, I just think there was a really cool discussion, my friends, and an interesting topic. Maybe like a bit more like hardcore analysis than we sometimes normally do, or you just think about when you're just trying to relax, kick back, and and play a game. Like I get it, I know, but it's a cool idea.
And I didn't even talk about like the technical aspects of what I read in those papers.
We had like 2 or 3 other things on the docket to maybe discuss. But like I said, like even so, just again, either if you've never heard of this, maybe now you have, and be aware of it, and maybe you can like try to spot it, like play a gamify yourself in a sense, and gamify your life in general, which I think
gamify your life, baby.
It's a positive thing. So yeah, I think we'll call it at that. I've been Scott Thurlow here in my digital world. I've been here with Stephen Amosi.
Just platforming around.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I'm hoping to start a trophy or achievement system for life in an AR system. So you got a new job, ding, and you get points to accumulate. And
watch out for that coming to your life sometime soon when he finalizes it.
Hopefully the job becomes easier the less interested I am in it.
Yeah. That's what he's working on, yeah. That'll be the next class revolution, if you will, in terms of technology. So look out for that sometime soon.
The social points and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think that will do it. Thank you so much for joining us. We shall see you next time. Good night and cheers.
Later.
Thank you for joining the Lost Signals Games and Gaming Culture. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows and more, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.